All right, so I had to break this up into 4 parts. So here's part 4. Okay, so now we're going to get into discussing how to go about performing a needs assessment. I want to start off by saying that there is no recipe that I can give you to conduct a needs assessment, simply because there's too much variability in the situations and populations that you'll be working with for me to do that. We will talk about some um, kind of guidelines that you can follow when you're putting together your needs assessment, but really how you conduct a needs assessment depends on the nature of the situation, what resources you have available, what abilities you have on your program committee. But let's kind of talk about some things. So we could do an informal um, type of approach where you're just trying to get a sense of what the needs are. Um, Now you can do this through an observation, right? So if you look at the slide, it says educated and informed and observation. So you're making the observation under some pretext or under some type of familiarity with the situation, so you're able to recognize certain things. Just keep in mind, though, observations like this in an informal format really produces allegorical data or qualitative data at best, but not something that you should, you know, you don't want to put all your eggs in that informal basket. It may be good just to kind of get a sense of your population in a natural setting and how they behave. But beyond that, you still want to add some formal components we'll talk about later. Informal approaches usually are the result of limited resources. Um, yes, you can identify a needs assessment that's more comprehensive, but you recognize that you lack the resources to do that. And if you go this route, just keep in mind that the quality of the data you're collecting is very low. Um, so we want to kind of stray away from informal approaches unless it's some kind of like precursor to your formal approach. Now, with a formal approach, okay, so it's going to be comprehensive. It means that there's going to be some type of analysis plan. There's going to be a data collection plan. Um, the instruments used to collect the data are going to be reliable and valid. Um, you could go about it in a systematic form of data collection where basically the prompts on data collection are dictated by some type of framework that you've identified. But just keep in mind, the circumstances are really going to be what determines the type of needs assessment that you perform. And there's many different ways that we will discuss.
But what we can talk about are just some a generalized model for conducting a needs assessment. So the idea is that you follow each of these steps to some degree when you conduct a needs assessment, and the end result should be something that you can utilize. So determining the purpose and scope, of the needs assessment, gathering data, analyzing data, identifying risk factors associated with the health problem, program focus, and validating the need. Okay, so let's step through these. Okay, determining the purpose. What are you trying to do? Um, why do you need this needs assessment? What do you want the needs assessment to tell you? How much detail do you need the needs assessment to present? Right. So you're going to say, well, what's the goal? Right. What is the purpose? Why am I utilizing resources to collect this information? Okay. What is this data going to allow the planning committee to do, or is it going to kind of illuminate the problem in a way that is more easily seen? How extensive will the needs assessment be? Okay, how much detail do you need in order to make the appropriate decision? And then ultimately, also you also have to consider what resources do I have available to conduct this needs assessment, right? The first three questions, if you consider this, with a unlimited budget, right, you could come up with, a lot of detail, but when it comes to actually facilitating the needs assessment, if you don't have the resources to do it, then you're not going to be able to do it. Okay, gathering data. All right, so now we're thinking about, okay, I know what data I need. How am I going to get it? Okay, um, so with relevant data, if there's an existing data set, well, you want to make sure that you're collecting data or accessing data that's relevant to your priority population. Um, you know, you may have data available about prevalence of type 2 diabetes, but it's presented at the state level. Well, you're working with a group in Palm Beach County. The prevalence that's reported in the state level data may not be appropriate, or it may not be equivalent to the prevalence rate that's going on in Palm Beach County. So you want to consider that. Again, with secondary data, do you have access to it? Does it address your needs? Primary data, right? Fill in data gaps. So you want to kind of review the existence of secondary data. If it's already out there and it serves your purpose and you have access to it, then use it. Okay. But when you run into a situation where it kind of addresses all my needs, but there's a few things that it doesn't address, then you want to kind of think about, okay, well, do I want to conduct a primary data collection? Okay. Desirable to have both primary and secondary. I don't know about desirable, but it's advantageous if you can do that, because you could conserve resources anytime you use secondary data, as long as the secondary data serves an appropriate purpose. Okay, several models that we may want to consider, and we've talked about these before. So you want to look at the SMART, right? The social marketing assessment and response tool. Right here, we're looking at consumer analysis, market analysis, basically the communication strategies, that sort of thing. The mobilization for action through planning, the MAP. Assessments look at the community and what challenges and opportunities exist within that community that you may want to consider as well. Okay, analyzing the data, all those things that go into, do I have the appropriate data types? Am I selecting the appropriate statistical analyses? Do the results help me answer research questions or needs questions that I have? Right? You got to kind of work that out. Pre-seed, proceed, we've talked about that in a previous lecture. So phases 1 through 3, so your social assessment, your epidemiological assessment, your ecological assessment can be used for guidance. So the quality of life in the priority population. How are you going to answer that? Well, you got to have some type of measure for quality of life. You got to collect that data, analyze that data. The results help you to answer it. Social conditions and perceptions shared by those in the priority population. Again, how are you going to assess that? Social indicators. So here we're really getting to know, this is phase 1 stuff in pre-seed, proceed, but we're seeing the issues from the perspective of the priority population that may kind of include some of these social indicators. So number 4, here's where you take those perceptions from the target population and you come up with a way to link it to the health issues that we identify. Again, the social indicators, that's going to be the motivation for many of the people in the priority population. We need that motivation to help carry them through our program. So if we could link those with the health issues we're trying to address, then they're going to bring some motivation to the situation to complete the program. And then moving on, looking at your health problems, which ones are you going to focus on, that sort of thing. So Needs assessment, you're doing it to serve a purpose. You have to understand what that purpose is before you set out to conduct your needs assessment. After you analyze the data, okay, so you run your statistical analyses, you also have to look at those results, and you have to interpret the result. What do the results mean in the context that you're trying to use it? The statistical software doesn't know context. It won't assist you with that, right? This is where your literature review, your expertise, your prior knowledge, that all goes into how well you can interpret your results. So after you analyze what's the most pressing need, what absolutely has to be the first thing we focus on. Do we have resources to address that need? Remember the priority matrix I talked to you about. So what's the most pressing need, right? That would be the level of importance. Are resources adequate to deal with the problem? That would be the level of change possibility, right? So we have to consider those within the matrix in order to properly prioritize these things. Can the problem best be solved by a health promotion program, or could it be handled through other means? Perhaps, like with the smoke-free or tobacco-free campus policy. Well, some would argue that policy is a part of health promotion, but instead of having an active health promotion program to inform and educate people on smoking and the benefits of not smoking, and that sort of thing, putting a policy in place, you kind of force people into certain choices. Maybe that's something you want to look at. Are effective intervention strategies available to address the problem? Well, has someone already kind of worked out what works and what doesn't? Does that apply to the situation in terms of location and priority population? Then maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, you could kind of revise the wheel, take an existing intervention strategy that has a proven track record and tweak it to fit your situation. And finally, can the problem be solved in a reasonable amount of time? One thing I'll say about this, if health status is your goal, a change in health status, just be cognizant of how slowly or quickly health status can change, because at some point, if you're hanging success or failure program on a change in health status, well, do you have enough time for the behavioral changes to kind of have an effect on overall health? Again, something to consider. Okay, so prioritizing our approach, and I uploaded a priority matrix kind of supplement lecture as a way to help you kind of come up with a prioritized list of issues. But the book also goes into the basic priority rating model, and it's probably a little bit more of a formal approach to a priority matrix. But if we go through this, we can kind of see how it works. So size of the problem. Basically here we're looking at to what extent is this problem distributed in the population. Probably looking at incident or prevalence rate. Oh, and just sometimes I mentioned incidence and prevalence. So the difference between incident and prevalence. So incident rate, and whenever you have the word rate, it implies that there's a time component. So incident would be the number of new cases over a specified time period. So if we think about COVID, we would look at the number of new cases that have occurred, say from March 20th to August 20th. The prevalence rate would be the number of new cases plus existing cases, but also you're subtracting out those individuals that either die from the condition, they recover from the condition, or they move out of the area, or are no longer considered part of the study group. So so size of the problem, you would look at incident and prevalence. So you're looking at, again, the distribution. And then the seriousness of the problem. Um, if we're talking about the common cold, how serious is that compared to, say, we're looking at tuberculosis? Okay, there's a difference in seriousness, so you would scale that. Effectiveness of possible interventions. Okay, so you have some interventions, or if interventions are applied to this situation, what kind of outcomes would we expect to see? And then D, proprietary economics, acceptability, resources. So basically, your capability of conducting an intervention in this group. They give you this formula. Remember your order of operations. So you do A plus B, and in parentheses, times C, um, then all of that times D divided by 3. Okay. Um, Again, if you want to go with this route, that's certainly available to you. The priority matrix is just kind of an easy, cut and dry way to simply prioritize from a list of issues that you may have. But the BPR is certainly something you could apply as well. Okay, step 4, in conducting a needs assessment, identifying the risk factors linked to the health problem. Okay, so here we're focusing on those independent variables. Okay, the idea is that if our health problem, that's our dependent variable, if we want to decrease the incidence or prevalence of that health problem, well, the way that we do that is by facilitating change in the contributory causes to that health problem. Or other words, we are looking for independent variables that if we manipulate those variables, if we change them, right, we would expect to see some type of change in the dependent variable or the health problem. Now, it goes on, talks about phase 2 of the pre-seed proceed model. They were talking about the epidemiological assessment. And here we're looking at risk factors in 3 forms: genetic risk factors, behavioral risk factors, and environmental risk factors. What I'll say about genetic risk factors. Okay, so there are the possibility of genetic risk factors, but when you consider the scope of the health promotion discipline, we really don't get involved with genetic therapies. So even if we identify genetic risk factors, I'm not sure that we could develop a program around those because of feasibility of affecting change. So you may want to note them. That may help you to define a subpopulation within your target population that you may want to work with, but you really wouldn't build an intervention around that as far as changing those genetic risk factors. However, behavioral risk factors, that's really what we're interested in. What behaviors can we change that is going to influence the dependent variable or the health outcome? And then environmental risk factors, certainly there are some environmental factors that contribute to a person developing a particular condition, but we would also look at environmental risk factors that either facilitate or impede behavioral change in the group. So again, here we're just trying to determine a collection of independent variables. Okay, step 5, identifying the program focus. So here we're talking about phase 3 of pre-seed proceed. Anytime you see predisposing, enabling, and reinforcing factors, that's phase 3. So we're trying to look at, okay, well, what is our program going to address, right? What are those priority issues? You also want to kind of go through some best practices. Right? Are there existing interventions that have shown or have evidence that supports that they are effective at dealing with this situation? How well do those interventions align with what we're doing? The suitability, the feasibility, those types of things. Again, when you reinvent the wheel, you're going to consume a lot of resources. If you just add little revisions to the wheel, okay, you're going to conserve resources. But you want to make sure that it's going to produce the results that you're interested in. Step 6, validating the prioritized needs. All right, so you've gone through your needs assessment, and out of that, you've identified the priority that you want to focus on. Are there any other sources of data or the existing studies out there that support your finding that this is indeed a prioritized need? Okay, we would call that concurrent validity. Okay, a health impact assessment. Right, so it's defined as a combination of procedures, methods, and tools by which a policy, program, or project may be judged as to its potential effects on the health of a population and the distribution of those effects within a population. So really, what that's getting at is it's looking at is the health promotion program going to have impacts beyond the priority population? Um, is it going to facilitate changes in the community? Um, you know, really, it depends on what you're interested in, what change you're interested in. In order to conduct this particular assessment. Um, one thing you may want to look at is, so say you have a health promotion program, you're recruiting people, and really the program is about changing obesity status. And a person signs up for that program, and maybe after a while, people start learning what the program's all about, and they start to stigmatize the individual that's taking part in that program, right? A health impact assessment kind of looks at that, or if there was an improvement in overall health status in the community, is there a trickle down effect? Would that now result in less hospitalizations, doctor's visits? Does that free up resources from hospitals to share with the community as far as prevention ideas? So it kind of looks beyond the health promotion program itself and look at the community in which these programs are developed. Now, World Health Organization kind of says, well, these health impact assessments, you must maintain these four values. One is democracy. You want to make sure that anyone that has interest in the program has access to the program within reason, right? If it's a program that's delivered at FAU, I don't necessarily know that you are compelled to include individuals from the surrounding community to be part of this program. But if you're offering a program available to FAU students, you want to make sure that all students are included or have the opportunity to participate should they incline. Really, it's meant to discourage an unequal opportunities to participate, maybe based off of socioeconomic status, right? Maybe there's some kind of entry fee that precludes those on the lower end of the SES spectrum. Okay, equality. Basically, here, anybody that participates in the program, right, it's going to be treated fairly, treated equally. Sustainable development. So you're looking at the short-term and the long-term impacts of the program, but also what's going to happen at the end of the program period, right? Does the program just disappear and you move on to your next priority population? Or are you taking steps to identify individuals that could carry on the program in some capacity so that the benefits are still available to the target population? And then ethical use of evidence. The best example I can think of as far as ethical use of evidence is looking at how COVID numbers are being reported. And the raw data is there, but different agencies are pulling together data in certain ways and reporting it in a way that may or may not be, I don't want to say ethical, but may not be telling the whole story. For example, in mid-August, if you go to the Florida Department of Health dashboard and you pull up some of the COVID testing results, from when they first started testing and putting these reports together, they included the total number of positive cases for both resident and non-resident combined. Okay. Then in mid-August, you pull up a report Everything looks the same, except now when you look at the title, it just says for residents only. Now, on the surface, this sounds like it makes sense, and this may probably what was driving this change is that, well, if someone has a test in Florida and then the next day they return home to Rhode Island or whatever, then is that really a problem uh, in the state of Florida, right? The person's no longer in the area; they've gone back to their resident state, and it's not a problem. Okay, I can see that, but now you have to consider, okay, so what happened this fall? Colleges and universities open up. Uh, I would suspect that Florida probably has a relatively high number of out-of-state students in our university system. Um, I just, bringing students in from the Midwest or the Northeast, the weather is certainly a draw for individuals to move down here to attend university. Probably more so than in a state like Wyoming. I don't know if there's a lot of out-of-state students that choose to go to Wyoming. I may be way off base here, but this is kind of my line of thinking. Um, and recognizing that colleges and universities, if you look at art stories around the country, there seems to be hot spots that pop up as a result of college students returning to campus. With the new way that state of Florida is reporting positive results, now only including residents, how many of those students that test positive in the colleges and universities are out of state and therefore wouldn't show up in that report? So that's what I mean. I don't necessarily say that's an unethical thing, and this may be a side effect of trying to separate non-residents that return back to their home states that received a test in Florida. Um, I see why you'd want to do that. Um, but looking at the bigger picture, especially with maybe it's because I teach at a college university, and maybe that's why this is something that's on my mind. But um, again, another kind of sidebar. But here we're talking about the health impact assessment and the four values associated with those. Okay, an organizational health assessment. So here, we're talking about assessments conducted at FAU. There's a student health assessment that goes out. It's not annually; it's several years that go by, but it's good through Owl's Care. You may be selected to receive a survey, ask you some questions. Um, those are certainly viable. Individual employers may do some form of an organizational health assessment. If we look at this first bullet, a recent amendment to the Public Health Service Act encourages employers to implement comprehensive worksite health promotion programs for their employees. And basically, this amendment just makes grants available for work sites to incorporate some form of health promotion. Under the new law, they can utilize those grants for up to 30% of the total cost of coverage to encourage participation. And there's some criteria, some loose criteria for a health promotion program to fit under this particular amendment. But also notice in this amendment, it also goes on to mention that employers can't require participation if they utilize these grant dollars. So reasonably designed has a reasonable chance of, a lot of these things are, what defines reasonable. Usually if it sounds um, like something that could be beneficial, then it's probably going to fly. Not overly burdensome, not a subterfuge. A subterfuge just means utilizing deceit, like, so I'm collecting this information, but then I'm going to use it against you later. So maybe we're doing a needs assessment, a health assessment, and I'm trying to identify smokers, and ask a question: do you smoke? Yes or no? Well, then I get the results back, and I say, aha, okay, all those you smokers, I'm going to charge you more for health insurance. No, we can't do that. We shouldn't be doing that. Is not a highly suspect in the method chosen to promote health. Again, we're not using any type of coercion or anything like that to increase participation.